Hi everyone, welcome back. This is Professor Hall and this is our first lecture on Little Women. So today we're going to be doing a brief summary, and then after this I will be talking a little bit about the book and the literary movements during which it was written and how it kind of fits into American literature. And then after that, I'll have some face-to-face talks with you about some of the themes of the novel. So let's get started. The book opens with four sisters. This is a picture from the most recent film, which is not my favorite, but I do like the picture. Anyway, the novel follows the lives of the four March sisters. So Meg, Jo, Beth, and Amy, as well as their neighbor, Theodore Laurie Lawrence. The first half of the book was called Little Women and was published in 1868. It focused on the girls' younger years. The second half of the book, in some countries where it was published, was called Good Wives, even though the author didn't really want it to be called that. And that was published the following year. That focused on the young adult lives of these young women as they moved into marriage and away from home. So both volumes were combined into one book in 1880, and then they were published under the name Little Women. I love the opening line, "Christmas won't be Christmas without any presents." And this picture here from, I think, the 1940s or the 1930s version of the book. The book opens at Christmas, and it's trying to demonstrate that the March family is really filled with women trying to live good moral lives while their father is serving as a chaplain in the Civil War. So what you should look for in the beginning is how each of these characters is introduced and the ways in which their positive qualities as well as their flaws. The family is clearly struggling financially. So some critics have called this genteel poverty, meaning that they don't have money, but they have enough money to get by, and they have a desire to help others. So they behave almost as if they're wealthy in many ways because of their charity and kindness toward others. They also have one servant, Hannah, who's like part of the family. They give away what they do have to the less fortunate. So this opening scene really kind of sets the tone for the book, showing this time that should be happy and bountiful, and how they're using that time to for the greater good. So the two oldest sisters are... Sorry about that. The two oldest sisters are Meg and Jo. The reader really does get a sense of each one of these people individually and their virtues and their flaws, as I said. So Meg is the oldest. She is looking forward to womanhood with anticipation. In some ways, she wants to hold that off a tiny bit in some scenes, but for the most part, she really wants to fit into society. She wants to be a wife and a mother. So she works as a governess. She's kind of envious of the clothes and the wealth her friends and employers are showing. So a lot of her friends wear nicer clothes than she does, even though she's prettier than them. So she struggles a tiny bit with vanity and fitting in. A lot of her struggles have to do with fitting in at the beginning part of the book. Jo is next. She is really full of life and spirit, but she also wants to hold on to her childhood in many ways. So as her sister is preparing to get married, she thinks that it's dreadful that someone's courting her, that this person's going to take Meg away from the family, and that things should just stay as they are. So she is a hard worker, but in many ways she's quite immature, and you'll see that flaw go through from the first part of the book to the second part of the book. She's impetuous and prone to fits of anger, and she is quite blunt and ill-mannered. Now, I want to say, before I move on, I'm going to talk about this more with the themes, but a lot of Jo's personality there are qualities that today we would admire, having a lot of spirit and going after things in life and having goals. But the book is very clear to point out that although some of these qualities are to be admired, when taken too far and being impetuous and being immature and being kind of hot-headed, that these are flaws that she needs to correct in herself if she wants to be a good woman later on, and a good, upstanding, moral person. So the two younger sisters are Beth and then Amy. Beth is very kind and gentle. She's the peacemaker of the family. She's someone who always puts charity ahead of herself. She loves music, but she's really too frail and too shy to go to school. She struggles with speaking to people outside the family, especially boys. There is eventually a boy that she does feel more comfortable talking to because he has a physical disability. She wants to be kind of a caretaker for him. That's kind of a small point of the book. What I want you to kind of look for with Beth is she too saintly? Is the shyness really a flaw, or is it just sort of part of her personality? Amy is the youngest, and she is quite a gifted artist. So Beth is gifted musically, Joe is gifted with writing, Amy is gifted with art. Amy longs for elegance in society, a little bit like Meg, but not exactly with vanity. Really, she's struggling more with selfishness and materialism. So she cares about things. And she has a lot of friends. She's quite popular, but a bit envious of their lifestyle as she and her family kind of struggle in poverty. So the two oldest girls are often paired together, but each one of them takes care of one of the younger girls. Joe and Beth have a special friendship. Meg looks over Amy because they do have quite a bit in common. So you kind of see in the first part of the book, Joe kind of trying to teach Beth to be a little bit more outgoing, Meg trying to teach Amy to be a little bit less selfish. In the second part of the book, these roles can sometimes be reversed, so that Amy has lessons for Joe, and so does Beth, and Meg is relying a little bit more on her mother and things like that. So look for ways that they are kind of all teaching each other and helping each other to grow really as this family unit. I haven't really given you a plot summary, if you've noticed, for this book. For other books I will, but in terms of this book, there is an episodic structure. This means that although there are longer plot arcs, each chapter of the book really focuses on one episode or scene in the family's life. So that in many instances for younger children, these chapters have been broken down and kind of published by themselves, or you'll get like 2 or 3 chapters to show a little bit for younger readers. So in each of these chapters, we see the girls struggle to overcome their faults, as well as getting into kind of humorous scrapes and mishaps as children, and even as adults or young adults, they have some more humorous scenes throughout their lives. But each episode really is meant to teach a lesson. It's a little bit like if you've ever seen sitcoms like from the 1980s, there's a lesson at the end, right? They're guided by their mother, Marmee, as well as other adults in their lives who encourage them to be better, more virtuous young women. Many of the episodes are a little quieter scenes, often taken from the author's childhood, and we're going to talk about the author's life and how it influenced the book in another presentation, where I have some things from her diaries that she said about writing and about her childhood. But we see how these faults cause little problems in girlhood and how they could cause larger problems when they are older. So just as a small example, Meg, when she is younger, is at a a party where she has an older dress than some of the other girls, and they are dressing her up and making her into kind of a doll. They're powdering her and stuffing her into this very fancy looking dress. Now, later on, when Meg is married, her husband is working very hard but doesn't have that much money, and she overspends to buy silk that one of these same friends encouraged her to buy to make a new dress for herself, even though she and her husband don't really need it and can't afford it. So this is just one example of these flaws or problems that the girls have being reflected from the first half into the second half, and their virtues as well as they come to grow and mature. So essentially, the plot is structured as a Bildungsroman in which we see the girls as children or older teens in part 1, and then we jump ahead 3 years and see them as young women in part 2. This term, if you're like, what is she talking about? Bildungsroman, here we go, is another word for a coming-of-age novel. So in this type of book, the hero or heroine journeys through painful and joyous experience that help them to shape their identity and lead them from innocence to experience. So the protagonist is educated by his or her travels in the world. She learns moral lessons, develops psychologically and spiritually. In this book, we really watch all really 5 characters, if you're counting also Laurie, who goes through his own struggles. All of these 5 characters are coming of age. So this really is a coming of age novel. And there are more scenes featuring Jo, who is sort of slightly based on the author herself, or I don't know if slightly is the right word. Jo was inspired by the author's life, so we get a little bit more of Jo, but I think that a lot of times because of the film adaptations, we lose the other 4 characters in telling Jo's story. So look really for how each one of these characters comes of age. What are the painful experiences that they go through? What are the joyous experiences they go through? How do they learn and how do they grow? Their trials and their triumphs from childhood through adulthood. The title Little Women then really represents the period in a young woman's life where childhood transitions into young womanhood. And so I think it is a very fitting title for this book. Each of the March sisters has an experience which makes her realize that her childhood innocence was of the past, and that this is according to one critic who unfortunately I don't have named here, but the inescapable woman problem was all that remained. So meaning that in the first half of the book, we're seeing them really go from childhood to kind of being an older teenager, right? And seeing that my life is changing and I'm starting to take on these responsibilities. In the second half of the book begins with Meg's marriage, and that point kind of serves as a turning point for all of these young ladies to show, okay, now I'm no longer a teenager, I'm really going into being an adult. Now, having said that too, at this point in time, they didn't really have the concept of a teenager, but I think that you can see this middle childhood, I'll call it instead, and how those experiences are affecting their lives later. So look for each one of those experiences where each girl's childhood is kind of being left behind so that she can step into adulthood. All right, so that's all I have to say about the plot. I didn't want to get into, other than the first episode that kind of sets the tone, I didn't want to get into the other episodes because I think they're really lovely to discover. And if you have an understanding of who these characters are, and the author's purpose in these episodes, then you can get a good sense of what to expect with the plot. That's kind of the point of this presentation. So if you end up liking this book, the author also wrote Little Men and then Joe's Boys, the sequels to this novel. And Anne of Green Gables is another coming-of-age book set a little bit later in the early 1900s, and again following the story of a character going from girlhood to young womanhood and becoming an adult. The Adventures of Tom Sawyer was written a little bit after this book, a little bit after Little Women, and is the story of a young boy. There's not as much morality in this book as the other two I just showed you, but there is certainly the same tone of nostalgia and the idea of what life was like during the 1860s in America. So it's another fun read. Hope Leslie is something that I actually have taught in the first part of American Lit before, and sometimes in Women's Lit. This book has some similar themes. It's a lot different in tone, but the idea of transcendentalism that we're going to get into later, Christian morality, and what it means to be a good person in this world are in that book as well. Uncle Tom's Cabin is another example. Again, different subject matter, but kind of similar themes and some similar ideas in that book. So I hope that you like this book, and I can't wait to talk with you guys more about it. Thanks.